Hi, Steph. If a tree falls in the forest and it kills a cat, should we blame it on curiosity? So, last time I talked to you about fire, especially how oxygen is involved, I figured today I could talk to you about one of my favorite things to burn wood. However much I like chopping up dead trees and lighting them on fire, trees and their remains are a serious offender in the realm of stupid technical jargon. A version of this idiocy that just about everyone should be familiar with is vegetables. What are they? Is a tomato one of them? Or is it a fruit? Unfortunately, the question of whether tomatoes are a fruit or a vegetable is a false dichotomy. They're both. Fruits are an actual well defined part of a plant. Vegetables are what your mother tells you to eat that you don't want to. They're culturally defined as plant things that we eat that aren't particularly sweet or juicy. Because tomatoes are acidic and are often used in savory dishes, we call them vegetables. That doesn't change the fact that it is the structure that the tomato plant forms around the seeds, so it's technically a fruit. Vegetable is a word that shouldn't be used in the same conversation as the word fruit. In some ways, the way that trees and their wood are classified isn't as bad. At least the terms are compatible. But they are some of the most misleading terms possible. Hardwoods and softwoods. If you hadn't figured it out yet, hardwoods aren't necessarily hard, and softwoods aren't necessarily soft. If their names were some kind of sick joke and were reversed from what they actually meant, that would be stupid, but not that confusing in the end. However, it's worse than that. The entire range of hardnesses of softwoods exists inside of the range of hardnesses of hardwoods. I made this relatively accurate, though obviously not comprehensive, linear graph to show a visual representation of just how silly this is. So what do hardwood and softwood actually mean? Since it clearly has little to do with how hard or soft the wood actually is. Well, it's about the seeds. Hardwoods are all from woods that are from trees that flower and produce fruit around their seeds. Flowering plants are known as angiosperms, which comes from the Greek words for seed and casing. Softwoods, on the other hand, are all woods from trees that produce their seeds unenclosed on the surface of modified leaves, often in the form of cones. Plants with unenclosed seeds are known as gymnosperms, also from Greek, meaning naked seed. So that separates hardwoods from softwoods. Kind of. Some definitions say some definitions of hardwoods say that they are specifically a branch of angiosperms known as dicotyledons, or just dicots, as opposed to monocots. This complicates things a bit again, because back when I learned these distinctions in high school biology, they were laid down as law, and the general rule of thumb was that dicots were the woody plants and monocots were everything else. The actual definition is in the name. Cotyledon is Latin for seed leaf, and refers to the first leaf or leaves that exist inside the embryo of the plant in the seed. Monocots have one, dicots have two. This, combined with general woodiness, made scientists rely on these groupings heavily for classification. In recent decades, though, by mapping the progress of molecular changes in the DNA across species, it's been determined that monocots are actually more closely related evolutionarily to dicots than some dicots are to each other. So, as a classification, it mostly comes down to shared characteristics, like how many leaves they're born with and if they're woody. For instance, small flowers like lilies and orchids, as well as grasses like cereal grains, are monocots, so they're not woody, except bamboo is a grass, and palm trees are monocots too. So what is woody? What is wood? The strict definition of wood is that it is the secondary xylem, that's xylem with an X, which is a particularly tissue type that is structurally important in the plants that produce it. And sometimes wood is specified as being only the secondary xylem in the stems of plants as opposed to anywhere else it might be, like in the roots. Now, xylem is important in a few ways, and secondary xylem is a follow-up to primary xylem in multiple ways. Xylem and its sister tissue, phloem, are the transport system in vascular plants. Before plants evolved to have these tissues, they were very restricted in their ability to grow larger, and land plants consisted of things like mosses. Once these tissues allowed more efficient transport of nutrients and water, bigger stems and leaves could grow and plants like ferns developed. Secondary xylem was a later evolutionary development and provides the transport function of primary xylem, but also provides support, which is what allowed plants to grow up and results in woodiness. If you've seen small saplings or just young branches, you know that stems are very flexible at an early stage of growth, and the tips of stems contain stem cells, a lot like the stem cells in humans. They divide into daughter cells that continue to divide as the stem grows, and eventually they differentiate into the different tissue types that are required in the stem, be it trunk or branch. One of these is the vascular cambium, which is like the nail bed of your fingernails, but for wood. The secondary xylem grows in from this, while phloem grows out from the other side. So once stem has grown past a given height, it starts to thicken and grow outwards, and that is mostly the growth of the secondary xylem growing in from the vascular cambium, which starts near the outside of the tree, and it stays there as it grows. So the vascular cambium moves out as it grows xylem in. Wood, therefore, is basically the water pipes inside trees, which are also responsible for holding them up. As far as what technically makes a hardwood, and a softwood, it's about the seeds and reproduction, not the wood at all. But that doesn't mean that's the only difference. There are other characteristics and trends that differentiate these categories. Trees that are hardwoods usually have broad leaves, while conifers that produce softwoods often have leaves that are needle-shaped or shaped like scales. Conifers are mostly evergreens, while many hardwood trees are deciduous, meaning they lose their leaves seasonally. However, even trees that are normally deciduous might not lose their leaves in some areas, like the tropics where you have less seasonal change. These more constant conditions can also minimize or eliminate the presence of seasonal growth rings that are sometimes used to estimate the age of felled trees from a cross-section of their trunk. So clearly, there aren't a lot of simple rules about the classification of trees, which ends up being true when you look closely at pretty much any living things. But frankly, the living things aren't what I care about when I light a campfire or build something. So let's get into the autopsy. Most people might not know that wood is the secondary xylem of plants, but most people can distinguish any uncoated solid wood from other materials with pretty high accuracy. The main reason for that is that cut wood displays what we call wood grain. Now, a number of things can be responsible for making patterns in wood, including insect and fungal parasites, which are even sometimes desired for their aesthetics. But the cause of what is generally considered wood grain is simply the intersection of the growth rings of the tree with the surface of a wooden board.
Here you can see how growth rings probably look when you think of them across the cross-section of a log. However, boards are cut from logs lengthwise, so when you look at a wooden board, you see a pattern of parallel lines or arches, like this. This is because wood fibers are oriented vertically in the tree, so cutting boards vertically allows for long, strong boards, like a rope, instead of short, weak boards, like a sandwich. Irregularities also form around branches, resulting in knots, and other forms of distorted grain may form around anything that disrupts tree growth, such as injuries the tree sustains from being cut.
These growth rings originate from the xylem that is produced as the tree grows. having different characteristics at different times. Winter conditions in temperate areas result in less sun and slower growth. Similarly, dry conditions will inhibit growth. These periods may align with a single season each year, or they may cause multiple rings to occur in a single year, as alternate dry and wet periods happen multiple times per season, at least in some tree species. Some species may skip years or even have no discernible pattern to their growth rings. In most cases, when growth rings are visible, the inner portion of the ring is lighter in color and less dense. This portion grows rapidly early in the season and may be termed early wood or spring wood. The darker, denser outer portion of the ring is formed later in the season and is known as late wood or summer wood. In softwoods, the wood cells, remember that's xylem, the water transport system, the cells are mostly of one kind, tracheids, and so the structure is pretty uniform. Hardwoods are more complex. They still have tracheids, but most of the water is moved through cells called vessels, which are built like actual pipes, while tracheids are laid out more like a water filtration system. It's normal for hardwoods to be broken into two categories: ring porous and diffuse porous. Ring porous hardwoods usually have large vessels that are grouped in the early wood, making that portion of the ring visibly holy, while diffuse porous hardwoods have smaller vessels spread more evenly throughout the wood as it grows. And as usual with our theme, there's a continuum of more or less diffusely porous woods leading to some borderline cases being classified as a sort of intermediate group at times. And of course, wood from bamboo and palms has a structure and composition that is very different from true wood. So what can I say about hardwoods versus softwoods that you can take away and find interesting or useful? Well, if you're building and you care about the properties of the wood you're using, don't rely on the categories of hardwoods and softwoods to generalize. Instead, drill down and find out what you can about the specific species of wood available to you. If you're burning wood, especially wood grown in the United States and some other more temperate regions, you can probably assume that evergreen trees you find are softwoods and that they will tend to have a higher amount of resins and saps, which may burn well, but tend to leave behind more soot, which can coat chimneys with flammable residue. Domestic hardwoods tend to be less oily and sticky with sap and are probably a better bet for indoor fires and may pop less while burning. Most trees you see with leaves that don't look like needles will be hardwoods. And if you're buying prepared firewood, you can probably ask what species the wood is and look them up if you aren't familiar with them. So, wood. It's from trees. It burns. There's not much else you can say that's true about all wood. See ya.